we are very lucky. He flew all the way from New Zealand to join us here today in Cebu, okay, in spite of his very, very busy schedule. Okay? Now, can you help me to put your hand together and welcome Grant Washington?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Paul, for inviting me along to the Philippines. I always enjoy my time back here. This is the third trip I've made in the last year or two, and been to Cebu a couple of times now, and enjoy my travels around here a lot. It's becoming very familiar territory for me. While Paul's putting the presentation up, just to give you a little bit of background, I'm a nutritional physiologist. It means I study the effect of nutrition at the cellular level. I'm not a dietitian, although I do look at dietary habits amongst different populations a great deal. But my role in my science particularly is looking at what happens when we consume foods at a very cellular level. And part of the work that I do is exploring new ingredients and formulating new products. And when we had the opportunity to create a company called GTNZ, the team of folk that I was involved with said, if you were going to create a product, what sort of product would it look like? And what are the biggest challenges people are facing? What do they want to see? And for me, it was quite straightforward. The choice was quite easy. And I'll explain a little bit about why I made two major choices to put the products and ingredients into BK18 that we did. This is the product in its can form. We introduced the sachets first to the Philippines. The Philippines is one of the few countries in the world where the sachets are available. The rest of the countries we've worked with cans. These cans are sold into Vietnam and into Taiwan, and now in the Philippines as well. Quite excited. The can actually is good value for money because you're effectively getting twice the amount of product in the can as you do in the sachets. Certainly sachets have got a great place because they're extremely convenient to use, but this is a relatively new thing for this market, so I thought I would just explain a little bit about that. On my last trip to the to the Philippines, we had the pleasure of meeting a local fellow in Davao. Unfortunately, he couldn't come along. His friend Paul's, I think, is right. Yeah. But he was too busy running the country at the present time to come along to this series of meetings. But maybe Paul can get him along to the next one for us as well. We were having a conversation about nutritional status in the Philippines and the nutritional needs of the Filipinos. And I want to talk about that because as a nutritional scientist, one of the things that I did look at right at the very start was a little worrying. There are two issues that strike me about the health of the Filipinos. Number one, given your proximity to the sun, your vitamin D status, sometimes referred to as the sunshine hormone because you make vitamin D when you're exposed to sunlight. Vitamin D status in the Philippines is not very high. 54% of people don't have adequate vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is a very, very important vitamin because it does far more than just support strong bones. It does so much more than just support strong bones. That's the bottom end of the ladder of importance in my mind. There's so many other things. I've done quite a bit of work, and I met a physician who also specialises in vitamin D. And all the doctors I've met on this particular trip, and I've been in various parts of the Philippines for the last week, every doctor I've spoken to, we are all talking the same story about the importance of vitamin D, but yet how little vitamin D you as a population actually consume. Now this is just a general comment about vitamin D. And I think the issue for the Filipinos is the same as the issue for the New Zealanders. We want to avoid the sunlight. We want to avoid the sunlight. In New Zealand, we avoid sunlight for a different reason. In New Zealand, we live in a country that has a hole in the ozone layer. The ozone is a protective layer that covers the entire planet. But in New Zealand, there's a big hole in that ozone. Now, it's not New Zealand's fault. Well, partly it's New Zealand's fault because it's in the wrong location. But that ozone hole starts at the bottom of the Antarctic in the middle of winter, and it's the extreme cold in the winter that causes the ozone hole to widen. And then it's the patterns of wind that then move that hole in the ozone up over New Zealand and parts of Australia and keeps it there throughout our entire summertime. And then the hole goes all the way back to the Antarctic over our winter, and the whole cycle starts again. So we have extraordinary high levels of skin cancer in New Zealand because of that hole in the ozone layer. And I'm going to explain a little bit about why that actually is quite good for everyone's health in a rather roundabout way. It might surprise you. Anyhow, enough of watching me. Let's get on to the project of this. By the way, this was Mayor Duterte when I met him. He became the president after I got back to New Zealand, and it's quite exciting for me because I knew someone who was in politics, so I don't get to meet politicians very much. So that's very good. Here is the critical thing I want to talk about. This is really quite important. This came out in the New England Journal of Medicine, and for anybody that follows medicine or science, you'll know the New England Journal of Medicine is one of the most prestigious journals, medical journals in the world. The British have a journal called The Lancet, which is where all the top medical stories are published if you're British, or if you're European. The Americans have this one, New England Journal of Medicine. And in this particular journal, what they were saying is that the young adults of today and the children of today are unlikely to live older than their parents. For the first time in generations, the first time in centuries, our children are not going to get as old as we will be. Why? Because of our diet. Diet and nutrition. Our access to fast food, our access to quick calories. The pressure that the food industry is placing upon us. This notion towards bottomless amounts of white rice during dinner time. I saw this today. We went to dinner. And the restaurant we went to was going to give you unlimited white rice. My gosh, please. This is not the approach. This is not a healthy approach for us to be taking. We need to be conscious of the pressures that these places are putting on us to lure us into there to get our money in return for these empty calories. Rick and I have had some discussions already today about the whole concept around this area, the pressures upon us, and how to change this lifestyle. This lifestyle is killing us, and it's killing our children, unfortunately. And we think tobacco is bad. Well, let me tell you, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, everybody familiar with Microsoft founder Bill Gates, him and his wife, Melinda, have a foundation. There it's a research foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They funded a 10-year research project to look at what's causing our deaths around the world. They looked at the death rates in 100 countries around the world between 2005 and 2015. In 2005, the biggest cause of death in the Western world was tobacco and tobacco-related products. 10 years later, in 2015, with the exception of one country, and that's the United Kingdom, who still has tobacco as the major cause of death, the major cause of death are dietary factors. Factors like giving you lots of white rice with your lunch, bottomless amounts of white rice. Those are dietary factors. Those are the things that are killing us and our lifestyle. That's the thing to remember in all this. However, the good news is while dietary factors are becoming the #1 cause of death in the Western world, it's my humble belief as a nutritionist, as a nutritional physiologist, that nutrition and diet can play a very, very positive role in correcting that. Not looking to the pharmaceutical industry for our quick fixes, but looking back at our diet, fundamentally getting back to basics again. It's going to take a while to reverse these trends, but I think we are on the right track in understanding. So, a few years ago, colleagues of mine were working on this particular project on how to use nutrition to reverse these effects. And we came up with this concept of biokinetics. And what biokinetics basically mean is the ability of products like this one here to turn off some of these gene functions that are causing illness. We have all the genes in our body. Every cell in the body has exactly the same copy of our genetic blueprint, our DNA, every cell. But it doesn't mean, just because we've got a particular gene, doesn't mean that gene's going to be operational and active in our bodies. Many of those genes remain switched off. Many of those genes are prematurely switched off. Sometimes you will have heard of people, and here's a classic example because I can talk to this from personal experience. Sometimes people go prematurely grey. Their hair goes prematurely grey. And you wonder, was it stress? Was it some environmental factor? I worked on someone with this issue once. I gave them an alternative, a natural product alternative, to switch their hair colour back on, and I had great success doing that. I was able to turn the gene mechanism back on. Now, they were going to go grey anyhow. At some point, they're programmed to go grey, but just not as early as they were going grey. And by turning this gene back on again so that they could go grey and age at their natural rate, their hair, which was actually quite white, started to go dark at the roots.
Wow.
Not because they were applying dyes or anything, but because their natural hair colour was starting to come back. Some of the components that we were working with, in fact we were using here as an example of some of the components, ended up coming into BK18 because we know it has the capacity to turn certain genes back on. Last year we filed a patent. We filed a patent around this function of switching genes back on again. Quite excited about that. So, let's get back to New Zealand. Remember I told you, it's a lovely place to visit, but if you're coming to visit, and I hope you all come to visit, remember to bring a white brim hat and sunscreen and long sleeve. Because you don't want to get sunburnt in New Zealand. Why? Because the sun is dangerous to us. It's dangerous to our skin, it causes skin cancer. Now, we're lucky because we can put things on to protect ourselves. But our fruits and vegetables that we grow in New Zealand can't protect themselves. What happens is our fruits and vegetables use other things to protect themselves. They increase the amount of antioxidant in the fruits and the vegetables to protect against the oxidative damage or the UV damage from the sunlight. They're called secondary metabolites, and many of these plants, almost all the plants that grow in New Zealand that are under stress from UV light, have a way to combat that because they can't get out of the way of the sunlight. That's going to be there. So they have evolved mechanisms to deal with it. And fortunately for us, when we eat the fruit, when we eat the apples and the pears and so forth, we're actually eating a lot of high potency antioxidants. Now, recently, due to extremely heavy rainfall in New Zealand, our apple crop didn't come into season soon enough. And we had no apples to eat. And I have a couple of particular favourite apple varieties that were developed in New Zealand and I eat every time, this time of year. My favourite. Now these apples are also grown in the United States. And they shipped out these American apples into the New Zealand stores to help overcome the shortage we were having. And here were these beautiful Pacific rose apples, gorgeous, wonderful flavours. And here were these other little apples that were grown in New Zealand, horrible little things. They were quite ugly. Not a particular fan of those ones. But I didn't buy the American grown Pacific rose apples. I bought the manky one that was over here. Why? Because for my dollar, I want the one packed full of the phytonutrients, all of these secondary metabolites, all the extra antioxidants, because I know that apples grown in the United States don't get this effect of high UV light. I've tested it. I've done it with Bin cherries. Cherries are grown in New Zealand, they're also grown in the United States. We looked at antioxidant differences between US grown fruit and New Zealand grown fruit. We did the same thing with the kiwi fruit. We looked at antioxidant levels. We're talking several times, hundreds of times greater levels of antioxidants and bioactive compounds from New Zealand. So when we developed GT&Z as a company, that was one of the things we're going to do, is bring some of the nutrient value that comes out of our country to your country. That's the premise. We're starting with this. Thank you. The next step in all this, as I wanted to explain, is New Zealand's dairy industry is a little different. New Zealand's dairy industry is a little different because it's called a pastoral dairy industry. It's a grassland dairy industry. It's one of the few countries, Ireland is another country just like New Zealand, where our cows live in these paddocks all year round. There's no requirement to put them in a barn like they have to do in the United States because it snows and it gets very cold, or in Europe, the same problem. In New Zealand, the cows just live in the paddocks all year round, and they're living on that grass. Now that is the same grass that's getting all that UV light, and the grass has to protect itself. And the antioxidant from the grass ends up going through the animal and improving the quality of the milk that we drink. Again, healthy products. That's one of the reasons why I'm proud to be able to offer New Zealand milk powders, New Zealand protein powders, New Zealand constituent components in the BK18. It's all part of that story. So, why did I develop BK18? I said right at the start, the team said to me, Grant, you can develop whatever product you want. What do you want to develop for the first product? My immediate reaction was, like a lot of families in this place, and I'm sure it's true in the Philippines, heart disease is a very, very real phenomenon. And it's real for my family. My brother was diagnosed with heart disease. In fact, I'm sure my other brother has it as well. And if I look at myself, I'm probably a candidate because there's a genetic link to it all. So I wanted a product, first and foremostly, that would address the issues of helping my family prevent the risk of heart disease, number one. Because that's important to me. I want to see my children grow up, and I want to see my brother's kids grow up. Actually, if they're grown up, I want to see them get married, is really what I want to see. But there is, well, let's talk about this for a second, because this is heart disease, and this is how this product is trying to address it. And I've said this before. I mentioned vitamin D right at the very start, the sunshine hormone. Now, what on earth is vitamin D doing in a product for heart disease? We know vitamin D is all about bones. Well, vitamin D and bones is just the tip of the iceberg. I said right at the start, it's only the very bottom of the ladder in terms of importance. There are more vitamin D receptors, more places for vitamin D to bind onto in the heart than there actually is in the bone. So what does that tell you about the importance of vitamin D to the heart? It's very important. Nutritional scientists like myself, research physicians, don't fully understand yet what vitamin D does in the heart. We know from population studies, those people that have very low levels of vitamin D have a much greater risk of heart disease. And we've seen it in New Zealand, where people have more heart attacks over the winter time, and vitamin D status is generally lower than it is in the summertime. And that research was published by the University of California, San Diego. In actual fact, not that many years ago. Vitamin D plays a role with folic acid. All these components, D, folic acid, and K, all work synergistically together. We have really three key vitamins, but they work together in a very important way. And by the way, I didn't mention vitamin B12. Whenever you're working with folic acid, you should always expect vitamin B12 to be associated with it. I didn't put B12 up here, but it's in the product. There's a very important reason. The two of them are like hand in glove. They have to work together to be effective. So there's B12 as well, which works with that folic acid. Folic acid, you may have heard that women who are looking to start a family should be taking prenatal vitamins. It's a common thing. Folic acid is one of the major reasons. And we think of the role of folic acid and its importance in helping young families and evolution of the unborn baby. But folic acid plays a very important role in the heart. Paul mentioned before about nitric oxide and the role that nitric oxide dilates the arteries, it dilates the blood vessels. It's our body's most potent way of increasing blood flow and supply to any part of the body. When our heart needs more oxygen quickly, it relies on nitric oxide to expand the arteries, to pump the blood flow quickly to it. Every major artery and capillary in the body responds to nitric oxide. It's the great vasodilator. However, nitric oxide has to get made, and without the enzyme that works, nitric oxide won't get made. You can take all the L-arginine, you can eat all the spinach which has the nitric oxide precursor in it that you like, but if you haven't got the enzyme to make it, and that enzyme lives in the lining of our arteries, and it's very susceptible to breaking down. It's a very susceptible enzyme to poor diet. So you can be taking L-arginine and you can be paying lots of money for good quality products, but if your diet is causing the enzyme not to work, then I hasten to add you may be wasting your money. However, something as simple as folic acid, it makes that enzyme work again. It reduces the enzyme. It's a technical term for turning an oxidized enzyme back into a functioning enzyme again. That's why we put it in here. Vitamin K plays a critical role. You've heard Paul and Rick talk about vitamin K. It literally sucks the calcium out of our arteries where it doesn't belong and puts it right back into your bones where it belongs. Vitamin K, we find that people that have low vitamin K levels have greater risk of hardening of the arteries. And yet, who's telling everybody all this? Which scientific media, which newspaper publications are telling people this? If you're taking calcium supplements, you need to be taking vitamin D and you need to be taking vitamin K. No point taking lots and lots of calcium in your diet if you don't have sufficient vitamin K to ensure that that calcium is going to end up in the right place. Because the University of Auckland in New Zealand have done lots of studies showing people are at greater risk of heart disease by taking calcium supplements because the calcium enters the bloodstream, it doesn't know where to go correctly, and it ends up going into the arteries around the heart, and it hardens. Simple thing like taking adequate levels of vitamin K can help. I'll talk about this probiotic. I said there were two reasons why I developed this product. One to help the heart. The other one was to help the immune system in our families. From the youngest kids in the family to the grandparents. We'll talk about the immune system because That advanced bliss probiotic is probably one of the wonders of the nutritional industry anywhere in the world. It's what makes this, in my opinion, the most biologically active product of its kind anywhere that you can buy. And I challenge anyone, even in the United States, to have a better product than BK18 when it comes to its bioactivity. There were a number of things that Paul put on the board that he wanted this product to perform. And it does. It does help with bone health, and it does help with oral health and the teeth and the gums, etc., etc. It has got an anti-aging capability, largely by the ability to help turn off aging genes and make them more youthful again, like the hair colour I mentioned before. Gene regulation and epigenetics, it's all tied to this. Don't worry about this. These are the two parts, in my opinion, the heart health and the immune health. That's what makes this quite an extraordinary product. The rest of it is great, but it's secondary. The immune capabilities of this product and the heart capabilities of this product. In the United States, speaking of immune support, last year, a woman was admitted to a hospital in the United States with an infection. Well, this happens every day. Everybody gets infections. They go into the hospital. Sometimes they're given oral antibiotics. Sometimes they're given antibiotics by an IV drip. She couldn't be given any antibiotics because she was resistant to everything. She was the first patient to be administered to a hospital in the United States where antibiotics no longer worked for her. Any antibiotic. She was resistant to everything. Penicillin came out in the 1940s. 80 years later, we're now struggling to find antibiotics. Come in, please. Excellent. I'm glad to see so many youngsters, so many young kids. So, in the United States, it's been 40 years, it's in the 1940s, when penicillin was first invented and first developed. And yet in that time frame, bacteria have started to develop resistance to almost every antibacterial product, any antibiotic available to us. And it really, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy because infections are a major killer. What Paul was saying right at the very start, I'm not sure if you heard him mention this, but before the invention of antibiotics, researchers, scientists were looking at how they could use other bacteria to fight other bacteria. It was called bacterial therapy. It was as simple as that. Using one type of bacteria to kill another type of bacteria. Because you know what? Bacteria have been on the planet far longer than humans have. And they know how to kill each other without creating resistance. And there's an organism in here that has the capability of producing its own antibiotic. Its own antibiotic. Not only does it produce its own antibiotic, it knows when to produce it and when to turn it off. It's called BLISS. It's called bactericin-like inhibitory substance. That's its general name. There are actually a couple. In fact, it doesn't just produce one antibiotic, it produces two. salicerium A and salicerium B. Those are the two antibiotics that this particular probiotic produces. But it only does so when it's under stress, when it feels it needs to be defending itself against an attacker, anything that's going to cause us harm. So it knows when to do this. So there is no probiotic anywhere else in the world today, and I've spent 10 years in the probiotic industry. No other probiotic can produce its own antibacterial substance, its own bliss, the way this one does. That's why it's an advanced bliss probiotic, first of its kind. And it lives in the mouth, it lives in the oral cavity. So it protects everything that we inhale, that we eat, that we drink. It's right in that area. It protects us before it gets all the way down into our gut. It's like putting up a steel cage in front of everything, protecting from all things. This is, some of you people will have seen this before. I love this slide. It's really good. This orange mat, this orange lawn, is the bacteria that causes strep throat, strep sore throat. A very, very debilitating condition, especially for children. These are just ordinary bacteria that live in the mouth, but these are the probiotic bacteria that live in the mouth. And you can see this big zone around them where it's killed the bacteria, completely killed it. So I wanted to go to a pharmacy and see just how effective was this particular probiotic compared to, say, an antibacterial throat lozenge. After all, we buy antibacterial throat lozenges to kill the bacteria in our throat when we've got a sore throat. That's the whole point of it. That's the marketing of it, right? Well, how effective are they? Well, it turns out they're a little bit effective in some cases and not very effective at all in other cases. Now, since I was here last, I've done some calculations, and what we work on is that the area, the actual size, the area, is a way to determine just how potent an antibacterial component is. In this case, the area is 7 times larger than these two. And so it's not just an additive scale, it's a log scale. So those of you who remember your math days, you know that log scales are exponential. They go up, making this 10,000 times more potent and antibacterial than competition A and competition C, the two major selling antibacterial throat lozenges sold in New Zealand. They were from pharmacies. It's a bit embarrassing if you're a drug manufacturer and those are your products, and here's a probiotic that's sold in food, 10,000 times more antimicrobial. And we put exactly the same amount, 10 micrograms on each dot. That was the conclusion after inoculation for 24 hours, 48 hours. So why is this important? Strep throat, sore throats are critically important. Sore throats kill children. In New Zealand, there's a disease called rheumatic fever. Rheumatic fever is the same infection that causes strep throat. It's the result of a strep throat infection. The bacteria gets into our circulation in our system and our body starts defending against it and breaking down the tissues in our heart. And unfortunately, for kids with strep sore throat that end up with rheumatic fever, many of them actually need to have valve replacements when they're old enough to have them. Sometimes heart transplants. And let me also say that a second strep infection to a child that's already had rheumatic fever is unfortunately a death sentence in most cases. That's why they can be on antibiotics for up to 10 years every single day. That's protection against taking it. So that's important. Here's another interesting effect of regular problems with strep throat. You can get children And in fact, when I mention children, I'm talking up to the ages of 18 or 19 years old, can end up with a psychiatric disorder. It comes from repeated infections of the throat. They can end up with OCD and various other conditions. Believe it or not, it's in the literature. It's in the published literature. It's called pandas. But it's not cute and cuddly. So, one sachet, one dose from a can, 2 scoops. Before I go on to this, I want to talk about the infection in children, because I'm reminded by the kiddies in front of me. In Italy, a study was done on an ear infection in children. Now, when I was growing up, I used to get ear infections a lot. It was from strep throat, a strep infection that migrated up to the inner ear. It's a condition called otitis media. And these children were getting four infections a year. An ear infection causing an ear abscess. Weeping from the ear, extremely painful. Time off school, time for the parents to stay at home and look after their children often. For 60 days, they were put on the equivalent of 1 dose of BK18's probiotic a day. 60 days they were on this. And the frequency of infection went from 4 times a year to 1 time every 4 years. There are very few pharmaceutical products. There are very few pharmaceutical products that can take an infection rate from 4 times a year to 1 time every 4 years. I know that there are some vaccines being developed for strep infections of the oral cavity. But now that we've covered that, let's get back onto in 1 sachet. You've got the vitamin K equivalent of 3 cups, 3/4 of a cup of broccoli. You've got the folic acid of a cup of spinach. You've got the vitamin D of 10 glasses of milk. Protein of 2 eggs. You've got a full therapeutic dose of the probiotic that I was referring to. A full therapeutic dose. Imagine getting all these into a child of this age, a 2 to 3-year-old, without them having a tantrum, about having to take all green vegetables and various other things, which is sort of, in my opinion, a little missing from the diet in the Philippines. I'm struggling to find much of this product here, spinach. It's a wonder food, but yet I can't see it on the menus. I'm a vegetarian, so I thrive on this stuff, and I really struggle a lot. But let's come back to that's BK18. I won't say any more about that. It's pretty obvious. We've talked about what's in this. I've shown you this slide before. You would have seen it several times. I was in Robinson's the other day, and I was looking in the dairy section, and I saw just masses of this product on the shelf. It was huge. It was everywhere. It's a great product, and as I said yesterday to some people I was talking to, I do like it. It tastes good. It really does. It's got a great flavour to it. But let me stress a couple of things. One of the reasons I was looking at this, I wanted to reconfirm something in my mind. When this company says that it has a clinically proven strain of probiotics in every bottle, what it means is they did a clinical study on 300 billion organisms. 100 billion in the morning, 100 billion at lunchtime, and 100 billion in the evening. And all the people that took the product did really well, and it was a very, very good product. So yes, it's a clinically proven strain. But you go into Robinson's or XM supermarket and you'll only find 8 billion of these organisms. Where's the 300 billion that the studies were published on? That's a lot of this product that you're going to have to buy to get the level of benefit. But unfortunately, the amount of sugar in it, if you go for the red cap version, it's going to be a pretty unhealthy thing. There's more sugar in this than there is in a can of Coca-Cola. 13% sugar in Coca-Cola, this is 14%. So if you really want to do this, go for the blue cap version. But you're still going to cost you a lot of money to get 37 bottles every day. That's a lot of this beverage. Tasty, but there are better ways. BK18, well, we have one clinically proven dose in every dosage. You don't have to take multiple doses to get what our research studies have proven. One serving.
How many scopes in one assay?
There are 28 servings in a can, and there are 2 scoops per serving.
So one assay is
yeah, one sachet is equivalent to 2 scoops. Correct. Yes, thank you for that.
in 1 day? 1 day?
In 1 day, yeah. 1 day is all that's required. You can take more, and I'll explain when you would likely want to take more, but 1 serving a day is all you require for this product. 1 serving, correct.
So 2 scopes per serving.
2 scoops per serving, correct. This is a colostrum drink. Colostrum is produced in New Zealand. Has anybody heard of colostrum? Yeah. Colostrum. People have asked me, what's better, this or colostrum? Because colostrum is for the immune system, right? Everybody's heard colostrum is for the immune system, helps ward off coughs and colds. And then I tell them, well, BK18 is good for the immune system. So what's better? Paul talked a little bit about it earlier. We talk about the immune system as if it's one system, but it's not. It's actually 2 systems. 2 important systems that work closely together. The first part of this system is the innate system. It's a rapid response. When you've got an allergy to something and you suddenly get an allergic reaction to dust and you start to sneeze or whatever, that's the innate system kicking in. It's responding very, very rapidly, very, very quickly. When you get bitten by something, a bee or something, and you see that swelling come up immediately, that's the innate system working. This is what's in here. This probiotic works along the line of the innate system. It's that first line of defense. It's a rapid reaction. It kills things before it can do the body harm. Colostrum works on the other part of the immune system called the adaptive immune system. I hear people talk about things like transfer factors. Has anybody ever heard of such a thing? Transfer factors in colostrum. Transfer factors are designed to transfer a copy of the mother's immune system to the baby's immune system in a cow, the cow to the calf. So the cow is giving the calf, through colostrum, an immediate boost of immunity based on what the mother had experienced. It's transferring immunity from one to the other. Because the adaptive immune system remembers things. It remembers what it's been allergic to. If you've had chicken pox once, you're not going to get chicken pox again. Why? Because your adaptive immune system remembers it. And that's where colostrum works, by bolstering the adaptive immune system. Okay? It's like a vaccine, Paul alluded to. That's like a vaccine, and this is like an antibiotic. Different, absolutely different. The thing is, we don't have a vaccine for everything that's going to cause us harm. Now, my personal experience with this, and I've been taking this since 2006, is I don't get sick because I take the probiotic that's in here. My family doesn't get sick. Maybe we could do with some colostrum. to help bolster the immune system, but we never get sick in the first place. So I'm happy sticking to my BK18 products at the moment. But perhaps there is a place to combine both of these to make a super immune product at some point in the future. I don't know. But that's colostrum. Anyhow, the research suggests you should be taking about 6 grams of colostrum a day. And this product, well, it's only got 2. Even Fonterra, one of the largest dairy companies in the world, recommend that you should be taking at least 6. In fact, they talk about upwards of 30 grams of colostrum a day to have an immune effect. Well, that's a lot of colostrum to drink. Anyhow, again, you only require 1 serving to get a therapeutic level of here in that immunity supporting product.
How much water?
About
A portion.
It depends on your taste. 150 mils to 250 mils. If you want to dilute it, you can. It's not going to affect the therapeutic activity of the product. Here's another interesting product. When I was in SM supermarket, I was looking at all the dairy products that were on the shelf, and I was absolutely amazed how many dairy products that Nestle have on the shelf. How many dairy products. And Nestle is a great company. And I only put this comparison up here. This is a breakfast drink from Nestle. But it's got a lot of multivitamins and multiminerals. Now, I don't want you to think that BK18 is a multivitamin, multimineral. That's not the point of this. We have very, very specific vitamins that work synergistically with each other. And to give you some idea, taking an excellent product like the Nestle product, you know, with 4 times the vitamin D and 3 times the folic acid that this has got. Why? Because those are the vitamins that we've identified are the important vitamins to have in this product. They work synergistically with each other. And finally, the last comparison, I'm sure some of you have seen this one before, but it's a little funny. I worked in the United States for 10 years for a large network marketing company. I ran a product innovation and R&D group for a company called Amway. If you know who they are. Amway, yeah. Neutralite was the company. Neutralite, the nutritional division of Amway, and I was based in Michigan, and this was one of my competitive companies. It was based in California. They specialize in weight loss. A Californian company, very, very big. They're a big California, US company. They're all around the world, actually. And I've spent some time with them since, and we've had a few discussions in the past. But this is their weight loss product. They have slightly less sugar than the others, you know, but still, you know, we've got even a lot lower sugar levels. And you know, what I said before about the sugar content and all the white rice you're getting in your restaurants, you want to keep your carbohydrates as low as practical, please. We have 1/3 the calories, and we have 10 times less fat than one of the big selling MLM weight loss products, which I thought was quite funny when I put this slide together. But anyhow, that's what I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen. So at that point, if anybody has any questions, I want to answer your questions, sir, a little bit. But before I do that, just to conclude, I might have to buy Paul a better one of these things when I finish. That's our operation based in Cambridge, in New Zealand, which is the big dairy industry in the country. How many doses of this product? 1 is all that's actually required, 1 a day. But if you for any reason are feeling ill and have maybe coughs or colds, or you've got a downline distributor that's suddenly feeling a little bit unwell and they want to take something and there's a cough or cold going on, you can take up to 4 of these things. And the reason why that's important, and there's Our bodies make a chemical compound called interferon gamma. Has anybody ever heard of this? Interferon gamma. It's a very, very important immune compound, especially for viruses, antiviral. And so in studies that we did back in New Zealand at the medical school where this probiotic was developed, we got people to take the equivalent of 4 doses all in one go. And within 24 hours, every single person had a measurable level of interferon gamma response in their bloodstream, which meant their immune system was working to maximum optimal capacity to fight off whatever it was that they were suffering from. Now, with adults, we tend to have more viral infection. So interferon gamma is a very potent antiviral. So if you feel like you've got some viral infection coming on, that's a good starting place, up to 4. But generally, if you're healthy and you don't feel under any threat, you take 1 a day. And by doing that, by taking 1 a day, within 14 days, 80% of you will actually have a self-sustaining population of that probiotic bacteria actually living and occupying inside the mouth and protecting your airways 24/7. Most probiotics today don't colonize. Despite what you might be told about probiotics, when you're taking a gut probiotic, people will say, and the gut probiotic will live in the gut. Well, it doesn't. It's not to say it doesn't work, because it works. They work extremely well. But they don't live there. They just pass through. They don't colonize. These probiotics colonize. They live permanently in the mouth after about 14 days of taking it. So what you do is you take this for 14 days and then you just keep taking the BK18. You just keep taking it and keep taking it. And that will make sure that you've got an optimal amount of live probiotic protecting you at all times. It's like having your own private security firm working in your mouth 24/7, protecting you against infections and bacteria. And there aren't many other things around that can offer that level of protection. And the other benefit is it kills the bacteria that can cause gum disease. It can kill the bacteria that can often cause tooth decay. But most importantly, for most of us who are my age, it kills the bacteria that can cause bad breath. It gets into the tongue and it literally causes the bacteria, the sulfur-producing bacteria, it kills them. Because these are the dominant bacteria of the mouth. And the sulfur-producing bacteria that cause bad breath, they're the interlopers, they're the bacteria that have come in recently and trying to occupy space. They don't belong there. So these guys will force them out. And if they don't leave voluntarily, they'll kill them and get rid of them that way. That's one of the other great effects. And we've got lots and lots of data and a patent around the effectiveness of reducing bad breath with this product. So, hopefully that's answered your question, how many times to take it. Once for normal, up to 4 times when you feel the need to. I've addressed the issue with respect to the halitosis and the oral cavity benefits of the probiotic. That's what it's sold for in New Zealand, by the way. That very, very purpose. It's called Throat Guard, and it's called the oral, the Fresh Breath Kit. There's another form of that sold in pharmacies in New Zealand for those very, very purposes. Sir.
I have so many questions because I think you know. But the first question is, do we have good bacteria in our body?
Do we have good bacteria?
Yes.
Absolutely. The bulk of the bacteria in our body is good. In fact, we would be so worse off if we kept taking penicillin to kill bacteria. Because that bacteria in our body, even though they might not seem to be working and doing anything important, they're acting like a physical barrier that stops other bacteria from the environment setting up shop and causing illness.
So my question is, if we take BK18, it will not kill the bacteria, it will only kill the bad bacteria.
Correct, Correct. This is what I mentioned before. It's sort of a smart organism. It knows when it's under threat, and it will only produce these antibacterial substances when it's under threat. If it doesn't feel threatened or isn't under attack in any way, because bacteria commonly attack each other if they don't recognize themselves, if they can't communicate with each other, it will only produce the bactericin, this antibacterial, when it's under threat. The rest of the time, it doesn't produce it. That's why it's so effective. Good question, though. It's a good question.
Follow up. So,
Please.
I'm taking it. Actually, I have asthma before. In a way, I think I have but this part of my body is still itchy. That's why I still cough, something like that. Up here, somewhere here. So, although I shifted from sachet to scope, and I was taking only one scope. I don't think it's equivalent to one. So whenever I'm looking like this coffee, so if it's hard already, you have to take lozenges, like for example strips.
It's interesting because coughing, asthma, sometimes asthmatics wheeze and they get that sound with their wheeze. Some asthmatics don't wheeze, they cough. And their asthmatic attack, I spent a lot of time studying respiratory medicine and salbutamol, albuterol was one of the medications I'd looked at in terms of management of asthma symptoms. And I came across a lot of asthmatics that never showed any obvious signs of asthma apart from when they had bronchoconstriction, they would cough a lot. And that was their asthma. That was the constriction of the airway as opposed to sort of an irritation. It was because their airways were restricted. They didn't wheeze the way most asthmatics did, which was interesting. I'm not sure whether that's your experience or not, but my recommendation under those circumstances when they cough and they got the coughing was to actually take their bronchodilator and see if that relieved the symptoms of the coughing as opposed to taking something like a lozenge.
The coughing does not really come from the inner part because
it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell though.
It's only irritation that comes from here. Before, when asthma is really coming from the inner part of the lips, vapors will come out and then phlegm will come out.
Yeah. So
That's different. This time it's just an irritation here.
Yeah.
But then we have to drop some phlegm also come out.
That's interesting. So I'm not a physician, so I'm not going to give you advice on obstructive airways disease and that sort of thing, but sometimes chronic bronchitis and asthma symptoms are often very, very similar. And chronic bronchitis can get a cough and mucus production and airway constriction all at the same time. But the management is often similar, although usually some degree of corticosteroid, inhaled steroid is part of that treatment regimen as well to help with that. But the good news is the research we have out of the University of British Columbia is not, this organism doesn't just kill bacteria, it's also a very powerful anti-inflammatory and it can actually suppress inflammation in the tissues. So I would persist in taking the probiotic during the cough episodes you're having. And see over time if you can't get some sort of control over that coughing, because that irritation might be an inflammation of that area. But the inflammation is going to come from somewhere, and that's the part that I'd be taking a close look at.
I'm taking it every day. For months since I was introduced to BK18.
Good. But the cough's still present.
But the asthma is the way
Hasn't changed. Yeah. Could be time to see a physician and see what's the there's something else underlying there, deeper down, because we can't get further down into the lungs where possibly where some of that is coming from.
Just to mention, asthma and some people bronchitis.
Chronic bronchitis. Yeah.
Is it also type food na trigger energy? Is it not like food?
In fact, when I drink water, the last, for now, or I think for weeks really, the last glass of water I drink is ginger, and stick with ginger and garlic.
Ginger tea?
That's ginger cause irritation, I think, no? Garlic. I was doing it, but I usually after I found out
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm not sure I can add too much more to the conversation, to be honest.
I think it's good to know that
Potentially, yes, yeah. I think the idea with asthma and chronic bronchitis is to get the inflammation under control, and that's critical. That's important. Are there any other questions I can ask? Sir, yeah. Right.
Can lozenges kill the bacteria of BK18 in your mouth?
Can the lozenges kill the bacteria? They probably can kill some, but it appears that even the most powerful mouthwash is not going to sterilize your mouth. It may reduce the level of bacteria, but then they come back again and they multiply and they find their own equilibrium. So I wouldn't be concerned about taking a lozenge, especially if it's a strepsils, because we know they don't work anyhow. Sorry. But if you want to take something for irritation as well, absolutely, you can take a lozenge. Yes, sir.
How long can the bacteria stay in your mouth after you stop taking BK18?
If you've got a colony that occupy and live in the mouth, we found most people 1 to 2 months before the levels start to decline again. I know of a woman who, after 12 months, showed no signs of the probiotics disappearing. After 12 months, she still had a full mouthful of. It really depends on the individual. It's a difficult question to answer in that respect. But that's why, because we're all individual and we're all different, I recommend people just keep on taking the product to be sure. But like I say, after 14 days, 80% of us will have a population of bacteria living in their mouth. So for whatever reason, if you miss it for a day or 2 days, don't be worried. Your probiotic will still be present. Just come back and top it up and keep going. You man, sorry, I was expecting you.
Yes, I have a question since my partner was diagnosed with tuberculosis and she's just taking 1 tab per day. So I would like to ask any recommendation if is it okay if we just continue the 1 tab per day or
This was for what disease did you say? Cirrhosis?
And he said that it's really better with 1 tab per day, so I would like to ask your recommendation if it's okay that we just continue the 1 tab per day or we need more.
With the liver disease, was it fatty liver?
No.
Here's the thing, a little bit about liver disease, and it's a big problem, and I think it's going to be an epidemic of disease. There's a condition known as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Non-alcoholic fatty. Alcoholics get fatty liver really badly. That leads to liver cirrhosis. It's the inability to break down fat. However, there's a new condition out in the last few years that's coming from obesity and excessive amounts of binge drinking, but often just by overeating. And it's called non-alcoholic, that means not related to alcohol, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And it's again a function of, it's like the goose liver pate, where the goose is given grain and force-fed, fragua, I think it's called in France. And the goose is given grain fed through the mouth and they're force-fed because their livers become fatty. And the French farmers like the fatty goose liver because it makes fragua, which is pate, goose liver pate. Well, geese are not the only animal to suffer this problem. Humans have it as well. Left uncontrolled, if we don't end up with diabetes, we'll end up with liver disease. And like I say, it's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it leads to cirrhosis. Once you've got liver cirrhosis, that becomes a very difficult thing to reverse. But if you can get to the fatty issues early and support it with antioxidants and support it with protein, which is in the product here, you've got a chance of helping reverse the condition before it progresses to something that's unreversible. People ask me about diabetes a lot, and I say that in the early stages of diabetes, while blood sugar levels are high, there's a chance that we can do something. If you've been recently diagnosed, before you go on to insulin, there's a chance that we can get things back to normal again. But if you let diabetes go too long unchecked, it's unreversible.
Well, I have a similar case, liver cirrhosis, personally handled by one of our members at a school. Went there in Isabela, Mobili, and ang liver cirrhosis just came out from the hospital. He cannot even move or lift his head. And then swollen foot. Ano na yan? And then the diagnosis is liver cirrhosis because of heavy drinking. Now, I cannot believe because on the day he took 2 sachets, and normally they don't sleep well. Okay? Diba? So I had a personal knowledge or personal experience encounter with this liver cirrhosis patient. With just 1 sachet, he claims. I said, continue. 1 liver sachet, 1 sachet of BK18. The following day, he was able to raise 7. He even demonstrated. I took videos, but when I switched to another phone, it was deleted. And then, he can walk. Before, he can barely walk. Hindi na makalakad yung liver cirrhosis na hospital eh. So, we suggested to them, continue, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. Evening, napakasarap ng tulog niya.
He is the living testimony here.
Yes.
He cannot sleep well.
Oh.
So, after taking BK18,
Yeah.
He's the example.
That is the patient that
He is the
concern niya ngayon, pero tulog na siya,
Yung diniscuss ng ating coordinator,
before masakit ko, the concern now is still yellow down.
tuloy po pa rin.
Once a day siya, once a day. So twice, that's why we ask. That's why we ask.
I tell you another testimony. Just 4 weeks ago in Ibiza, he is a friend of Noah. Okay, this person, what happened is the eyes, he got high fever. Then after that, the eyes turned yellow, and then he urinate blood. Okay, so when diagnosed, the doctor said that he have got HEPA A. So now, what they do is, this member of ours, I think so, at least know her. He let the person take BK18. The first 5 days, every 3 hours, one sachet, every 3 hours. And then after when he finish the one pack and the second pack, after around 5 days, the color of the eyes become clear, the urine clear, and now the person still continue to take 2 sachets a day or two serving a day, and now he is better. But they got another friend who never take BK18. When they are now in hospital, they did a transfusion and now they got a bag there. Okay.
This is,
I mean, this is, okay, first of all, I am not claiming that we can cure, but this is the testimony from what we know.
What you're saying is that you look at that disease, it's difficult to see.
Anyway, talking about dosage, experience ay pag-usapan natin. Normal yung tao, ang sachet isa na. Pero pag may sakit, doble mo. Yung survivor ng colon cancer, may sachet a day siya, talagang pincha na rin. Kasi dun sa comfort sa niya, balanso siya.
It is very part of the psychological, but still, it's very powerful.
Focus on 10 bucks. Pero, nakuha siya sa ako mismo, di ba kanina, sa
Liver disease causes insomnia. So if I treat the liver disease, the insomnia disappears, but if it happens,
Kunin ng body yung ingredients na isang sachet. Ang sachet, hindi naman yung ingredient mo. Kunin yung body mo. Kung matindi naman yung gumagamit, kasi ang kalaban mo, gagamitin din niya. O siya, doble ko. Tsaga lang yun. Normal suggestion ng mga doktor, huwag nyo isabay sa pagtitik ng metformin. At least 2 to 2 hours backup. Space pa, space. Normally, medicine yung center namin sa Iloilo, case ng thyroid. Ngayon, wala na ako. So, pagdating mo sa dosage at saka yung gumagamit sa pag-check yun, magkano lang naman yung tutusin. Mura yun sa mga may sakit. Kasi may sakit yung calcium. Pero kami the dialysis.
memory is going to be a challenge for
Pwede na sa
I wish it has.
Iwalay mo na lang na Okay, so any more questions?
This lady has a question. For the infant. This is a good question. Let me answer the question. The question was, what is the dosage for the infant? The infant. Baby. For a 2-year-old.
A 2-year-old.
Up 2 and over.
Infant.
Yeah.
Toddler.
Yeah. Below 1 year old. The reality is, this is not an infant formula. So it doesn't have the right nutritional profile for a child from 0 to 2 years of age. So I wouldn't recommend it. What you need to be looking at is an infant formula that's designed for up from 18 months or 2 years of age or something like that line. And I saw it at Robinson's, I saw it at SM, that's lots of them. Once a child's 2 years of age, they're considered to be well enough developed internally not to have to rely on infant formula or breastfeeding any further. So that's when you can start introducing this sort of product. But right now, the protein component is probably too high for a child less than 2 years of age. They need a higher fat component. And as you saw from the earlier slide, there's virtually no fat in this at all. No fats or lipids in this product. So skim milk is not a great product for babies to drink because of the lack of the fat, the animal fat. There's none of it in here. So coming back to the question, an infant, toddler age from 2 years is exactly the same as grandparents. 1 sachet or 2 scoops a day.
That's the whey protein.
That's the whey protein, yep. That's all that's required. That will give you the amount of vitamin D, folic acid, vitamin K, that whether you're a 2-year-old or an 82-year-old needs to be taking. It's the same for all of us. The same amount of probiotic for all of us. In New Zealand, we actually were looking at just the probiotic alone in babies, actually giving them to mothers who are just about to give birth and ensuring it came through in the formula in the babies. And the babies were only days old, were getting exactly the same amount of probiotic that's in here. I would take 1 billion CFUs. It doesn't matter whether you're a baby, a newborn, or a senior. It's the same amount of probiotic. Because if you don't need that probiotic inside your mouth, you swallow it and you absorb it, because every time you swallow saliva, you're taking the same bacteria that this is from, called Streptococcus salivarius, you're taking it and swallowing it. You're taking anything that's excess and it goes into the body and into the gut. Now, it's not considered a gut probiotic, but it will live through the gut quite happily. It's an oral cavity probiotic. That's where it works its best. And if you, sorry.
Can I share something relevant to the question? What's the thing?
Sure you can.
We have a doctor in Pampanga who, in the milk niya, he mixed at least half scoop
Yes.
of the milk
Yes.
for the day. At yun ang minimum na binibigay niya, not more than 1 sachet.
What
Kasi
is
meron siyang, the dosage for it.
what is it? There's an Obigani in Manila. What he do is, he know that the baby have got a special baby formula. So what you do is you buy the formula and then you take, scoop and mix together with the baby formula.
Yeah, you can say that. I can't say that. I can't say that, but I know that happens and I know people do that.
Through my experience, actually, I think he's 6 months, 8 months old. He's having colds and cough. Then what we do, we give that
Did you? Interesting.
Interesting.
And after that, what happens to the baby?
No more colds.
That's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of protecting the baby and the children. That's exactly why I give my sons the product and my wife and I take it as well. That very purpose. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay, last 2 or 3 questions before we do the wrap up.
Sure.
Yeah.
Last 2 questions.
Sorry, because I'm propagating BK18 to my mother and to my niece. Just recently, actually, my niece has a history of LPM, perhaps the in my mother.
You say LPM.
Those powers of men. It happens especially during their period. And when that happens, she has to go to the sleep room at night. But that's okay because later, as she would continue drinking water, it will stop. Now, I let her use BK18. And not only did she went to the sleep comfort room 10 times, she went to the comfort room 60 times. And yeah, and because she's already afraid and I did not know she was doing it, and he went to the hospital. She was hospitalized. But she was experienced just the dirt that comes out very, very onerous. And then she also has to urinate many, many times also. So because of that, I asked her, I suggested her to stop using BK18.
For a while.
Yeah, perhaps until such time that I just don't know what's this. Actually, she just also left from the hospital with the pain in the head, but it's okay already. So she used BK18, and then that's what happened to her.
After
She's
taking
declined.
Sir, after taking BK18, she got an LBM.
Oh, yeah.
LBM na daan.
Just LBM. But it says this period, especially during this period. Then times were wrong. But when
Even she takes BK18. How many times she takes BK18?
I don't know, but it's okay.
It's entirely possible that there may be an allergic response taking place, as opposed to the only thing I can think of that could cause that sort of rapid response is some form of allergy, maybe to the dairy. That's all I can think of. There are no known allergies to the probiotic, and we've millions and millions of doses of it. There's never been that sort of response. Yeah. Sure.
I'd like to know if the new ingredient in the BK18, the epigenetics, what is it for? And also if those people with lactose intolerance can take that.
Lactose intolerance. Now let me address the lactose intolerance for a kick-off. Lactose is milk sugar. Lactose is basically glucose molecules bound together with galactose molecules, and it produces a disaccharide, means two sugars bound together, called lactose. And when we're babies, when we're young, we have a special enzyme in our stomach that breaks those up, and we can absorb the milk and the milk sugar. But as we get older, we often lose the ability, and some people genetically lose the ability faster than others. Personally, I've never lost the ability to break down the milk sugars in milk. I can do it very easily, and I'd say most of you are the same way. The reality with lactose intolerance is the more lactose you consume, the more likely that much of that lactose will pass through the body undigested, and it means that the bacteria in our gut will end up trying to digest it. In fact, they will do a very good job digesting it, and it will be uncomfortable. It will cause discomfort and bloating and loose bowel movements and various other conditions, because the bacteria are using the lactose to ferment from and use that as sugar, and it's increasing the amount of bacteria that's in our gut, and it's never a good thing. That's what lactose intolerance really is. It's not an allergy, but it's an inability to actually digest the sugar in milk. And normally, the reality is, once you go between 8 to 10 grams of lactose a day, people who are lactose intolerant will start to feel it. If you're taking one serving of BK18 a day, there's not enough lactose in the skim milk to have that effect. If you're taking 4, you probably will feel an effect if you're known to be lactose intolerant. That's the rule of thumb that I work with. Most people can take, unless there's a very, very high degree of sensitivity, and I've not encountered that. Most people can take it. And here's the other good thing. The probiotic in this is called a lactic acid producing bacteria, called an LAB, lactic acid bacteria. And it likes to to take the lactose in our milk and break it down. So it can help with the digestion itself, because it will live on the same lactose that's in here as a starting point. So that helps reduce your lactose intolerance as well. So coming back to epigenetics, just let me say, epigenetics is not just one single ingredient, it's a combination of those 3 vitamins working hand in glove, synergistically, exactly, switching on gene functions. And it does so without necessarily getting into too much of the technical aspects. They're called methyl donors, and they donate methyl groups directly onto our genes and tag our genes to switch on certain gene functions. And there's a lot of research being done around methylation of DNA. And that's what those 3 vitamins actually do, and they switch on youthful gene function across 14 recognized genes, which we know switch off as we get older. And we can switch them back on with that combination of vitamins. That's what the patent's about. Last question then.
I have a question regarding this. I saw in the back, there's a sign, no approved certificates. Is there a possibility in the future that will be removed?
Okay, we encountered that, but since we are under the FDA, normally they will not pass the product if it is applied as food supplement without putting into that or stamping into that feature. But most of those products that are not supposed to be food supplement per se, if you classify that as not food supplement, they will allow you to put therapeutic claim, but it is now classified as drug, and the price go up, and the doctors will only be the authorized person to prescribe.
And just to clarify that, you see, any product that is under food supplement and that have gone through FDA to get an approved CTR must have that word non-therapeutic claim. If you don't have that, that means that product is not been approved.
Okay, so
that is compulsory by FDA, not by me. If you don't have that, if it's first supplement, that means it is not. They have not got that.
we will extend one more.
What?
Yeah, we experienced something and then got
Doktor ko na-advise na sa akin na gamot 28,000 isang per month.
Injection ba yun?
Oh,
Per
Hindi,
tablet.
tablet
Per
yun.
tablet.
Once a month, 28,000 for 6 months.
Nakamahal,
Maintain ko kasi
special.
sa Singapore lang yung mga ito. Buwa. Nag-text yung malis na ano. Yung sa'yo, yung Sophia?
No, never
tuberculosis. Thank you very much. By the way, we have our own members in Manila lactose intolerant. Ayaw nyo uminom. So, sabi ko, paano natin matitesting yan? Kung hindi mo titake, anyway, hindi naman yan natural or ingredients yan eh. And then when we remember Kaki Pixon,
Yeah.
when we went there, he is suffering, he has that lactose intolerance. But I was able to convince her, cannot. So, once a day, I said, it's different. Because a lactose intolerant, normally, amoy pa lang ng gatas, parang masuso ka na. Siya hindi, nainig niya. Okay, so, thank you very much. Yes, that's the
Sa good, Zimba, Islamic Zimba.
Yeah.
I have a brother sa Pagkamato ng Bukol sa Kristin. Bukol sa Kristin. So, pinadala tayo Krister mo yun, di ba? Pinagamit ko, anyway, para mayroong good effect. Kasi nahanap niya. Question ko, will he continue the biocleanser or pwede na ang BK18?
Bayad lang.
Okay?
Kaya naman nasa intestines.
Okay.
Bigay na lang, bigay na po. Okay, so we close the open forum and we would like to give thanks to we're very lucky na nagkaroon siya ng time for Cebu. Okay? And very soon, he has been granted a lot of grants to continue several research. I think eventually we'll learn of that. But our products, as he mentioned, as Paul mentioned, they are already on the patent or being applied for patent already, especially the epigenetics technology. No? So right now, we would like to give our appreciation again to Grant.